Well, hello, folks. My name is Josh. I'm the senior editor at theleadpastor.com, and I am so thrilled to be sitting with friend, unofficial mentor. I would put you in that category, Ed, and very experienced pastor, Ed Underwood, also the leader of the Recentered Group, a consulting, training, coaching service for pastors and churches. Man, Ed, I'm so pumped to have you here. Why don't you just tell everyone a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Recentered Group, and then I've got a
Sure.
pile of questions.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be very brief. I'm a Jesus movement convert. I came to Christ during the Jesus movement and through the ministry of Young Life and got involved in a local church and a pastor who discipled me. I was working for the Forest Service. Judy and I lived in the mountains, and I was on a hotshot crew called Fulton Hot Shots, fighting wildfires, loving it. And then I felt like I wanted to go to seminary, and I found out the bad news was I had to go to college. So I went to UC Santa Barbara, and the only way I could afford it was an ROTC scholarship. So then I went in as an officer in the Army in Europe, and we loved it. But then I went to Dallas Seminary for 4 years for a THM, and then pastored a church in the Midwest. And then Judy and I planted a church in the Northwest that just went great. And then I came in 1996. I came to the historic Church of the Open Door, the J. Vernon McGee Church of the Open Door, and it had just split twice. So it was a real rough gig. The first 5 years were horrible. I got leukemia, almost died, and interesting, that's what God used to heal the church. And then 7 years ago, I handed off to a guy that I had discipled, associate pastor, a man by the name of Dave Anderson. And I started Recentered Group because my passion is that churches would get back to what matters most to Jesus. And that is the Great Commandment to love one another and the Great Commission to make disciples. When we started Recentered Group, didn't know what we were doing. I had no idea how to do a website, none of that stuff. And I didn't know how to use Google Docs. I mean, I could barely turn on a computer. And John Lynch said, there's this guy in Canada named Josh. So Josh helped us build our website, put things together, and that's our history together. So I've been with Recentered now for 7 years, helping churches build a high trust culture. What we would say is our mission statement is we want to help churches build a high trust culture where discipleship thrives. And that just calls in a lot, working with elders, working with pastors, working with wounded pastors, pastors who are going to quit, pastors who have had moral failure, churches that are just jacked up. And there are a lot of them. So that's what I've been doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Just that. That's all.
Just that. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about the discipleship and high trust culture. And there's probably a bunch of people listening who maybe haven't heard that series of words together, high trust culture. What do you mean by that? Can you unpack that briefly?
Yeah, a high trust culture is built off of, and I have to give credit to a guy named Bruce McNichol. He's the one that started introducing me to these truths. So a high trust culture is a culture where the leaders intentionally build relationships where they trust one another. And it's built on a principle that we call protective love rather than accountability. And it means that we risk revealing who we are and what's really going on in our lives with other leaders. And when we are living in a high trust culture, what we find is, if we're being honest with one another, is that we are able to protect one another from our weaknesses. I tell people I am the least qualified person to protect Ed Underwood from Ed Underwood. I need people who love me enough to live out Ephesians 4, where it says, speaking the truth in love. We have pretty much downgraded that to mean preach the word of God, but that is not what it means. It's a Hebrewism, which means truthing in love.
Truthing in love.
Truthing in love. It's telling somebody what they need to hear because I love them. I just finished with a church I've been working with for 5 years, where we've gone through every leader. We've talked about their strengths and affirmed them. Then we talk about their weaknesses. And they get to hear what nobody's ever told them. I mean, everybody's told everybody else about that, but they haven't told them. And then we come up with a protection plan. How can we protect this pastor, this children's pastor, from their weaknesses? We're going to come up with a plan where we've already talked about those weaknesses because we want to release their strength and their giftedness in community through collaborative working together. Most churches are living with a diminished expression of their leaders' strengths. Because they have weaknesses, they begin to build guardrails around them so they won't mess up. So the leader is never set free to really be all that God has gifted them to be. I work with a lot of really, really good preaching pastors who are not good leaders. Nobody's ever said, hey, we love your preaching, you're not a good leader. Nobody's ever said that. So instead, they silo this poor guy. He doesn't even know why. And he's told, you can't come to staff meetings anymore. Why not tell the guy, hey, look, you're not a good leader. We got a business guy who's an elder. Let him teach you leadership, that kind of thing. That's what a high trust culture is. And then discipleship that's the Great Commission. And sermons are only 200 years old. Sermons are only, and I'm a preacher, so I hate to even have to admit that. They're only 200 years old. So the church got along pretty well without preaching, just through discipleship. So my definition of discipleship is an intentional relationship that encourages one another to trust and follow Jesus. There's so much pressure on pastors that they're doing so many things besides discipleship that I try to get them back to, why don't you come up with a plan rather than church growth with all these programs and all these insights? Let's just start discipling people who will disciple others. And it's a ministry of multiplication. And so I encourage them. I wrote a book about discipleship that they can use if they want to. But mostly, I try to get them to free up their schedule and the church schedule and to persuade the leaders that discipleship is the best way to go. It's the sustainable way to bring church growth and church health.
Yeah, 100%. So a high trust culture is a culture where you and I risk telling the truth about each other, about ourselves, on a foundation of love and acceptance and care.
Yeah, and really, the real bottom line is grace.
Yeah,
it has to be. It has to be a grace-based culture, or this will never work.
Yeah.
If you're in a performance-based Christianity, that's one of the first questions I want to find out before I work with the church. If they're performance-based, if they're into sin management, I'm not going to work with them, because this is you tell you the truth about yourself in that type of culture, and that's just blood in the water for the legalistic sharks.
100%.
So this is based on love and grace and mercy, and so the thing that happens is Josh and I work well together because we trust one another, but we've been through some hard things, so we feel safe with one another. Yeah. I don't fear what he's going to do with what I tell him about myself. Like just now, he knows me, and he knows I'm horrible at technical stuff. And I get this text from him, hey, I sent you the link. And I mean, if someone was holding a gun to my head, I couldn't find that link. So I said, please send it again. And he just kind of laughed, because he knows that's me. And I don't have to try to hide it. With other places, I've said, oh, yeah. And I've been downstairs rowing because I forgot about it. And I've had to hurry upstairs and try to act like I know what I'm doing. Put on that mask of super pastor. Yeah. We talk a lot in I Trust culture about living unmasked.
Unmasked, 100%.
Unmasked.
100%. Yeah. So, man, so many different threads you could pull there. But so taking risks, like, I think especially for pastors and for church leaders, that is a very intimidating thing. Depending on the church structure, like being open about your struggles to the people who are responsible for paying your bills, your paycheck, like that's a really, really scary thing. So obviously that's a big risk. What are some of the risks that you're asking pastors to take in the process of developing a high trust culture?
Yeah, first I have to get them to trust me. One of the things I have found in discipleship and in in preaching is that vulnerability builds trust. Vulnerability builds trust. So I'll be really vulnerable to these guys and tell them the mistakes that I made as a pastor, uh, and the mistakes I'm making now and the problems I'm having now. And you can just see it begin to dawn on them like, hey, this guy's real. I might be able to trust him. So what I always say is vulnerability builds trust. Redemptive stories build hope. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be real vulnerable with him, and then I'm going to start telling him redemptive stories. Okay, I can remember when I first risked this at Church of the Open Door, the elders were talking about something, and it was a real church growth program, and it was all about going after the seeker and all of that. And I can still remember walking around Church of the Open Door, and I had just been absolutely devastated by what happened in Oregon. And I just thought, the one thing I learned in Oregon is you schmooze, you lose. You schmooze, you lose. The number of times Judy and I would come home from a meeting with those elders and say, this is unhealthy, man. This is wrong. But then we would say, yeah, but so many people are coming to Christ and the church is growing and we're making so many disciples, we're not going to mention it. And then 8 years later, when I did mention it, it was over in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Because we had not built trust. And I was walking around Church of the Open Door, and I walk in there and we have the elder meeting and the guy prays. And we were supposed to be studying this book, and it was all about church growth, seeker-sensitive church. It was the hottest thing since wet butter. And I'd only been there 2 weeks. I've been there 2 weeks, Josh. And I walked in and I said, guys, I just want to get this over with. I read this book. This is not what I want to do. I preach the word. I disciple men. I build community. I'm not interested in Church of the Open Door being the biggest, brightest church. And I said, that's just not me. Maybe I'm not the right guy. And so there's this weird silence. And then the guys go, we thought you wanted this. They said, this isn't what we want either. We hired you because of your preaching, because of your commitment to discipleship. This is what we want. And if I had never spoken the truth, it never would have happened. So I tried to give these guys some redemptive stories and try to get them to start coming up with a strategy. Sometimes their churches are so far away from what they want, their strategy has to be a lot slower. But I want them to begin building these healthy truth-telling relationships. Sometimes what I will do is I'll use the example. About 30 years ago, I told Judy, I am just so tired of being alone. Pastors are lonely. So we just did a collection of friends that we had known for a few decades. We didn't know if they would get along, but this has been a 30-year thing now. And this is our group where we get down and dirty, and they tell me things about myself.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll say, why don't you start with those guys and people you can trust? But you got to risk it. It's either that or keep playing the game.
Yeah.
And I tell them, if you keep playing the game, here's how it goes. It's high school dating. They're going to love you for the first date. For the first 3 years, you're the best thing in the world. And then they start seeing your problems, and your problems start coming out. And then you're going to say, this isn't the church for me. And they're going to say, this isn't the pastor for me. Then you're going to start candidating on the sly. You're going to find another church that loves you. You're going to go there thinking this is the best thing. And then in 3 years, it's going to happen again. The average lead pastor in America lasts three years. The reason for that is that it's high school dating. It's just it's sick.
Yeah.
It's just sick. I want to know how I hurt people and wound people without even knowing it. And that's where I want to try to get these guys to. And I say to them, wouldn't you want to know that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a scary thing to step into, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it sounds to me that the types of risks that a pastor should take, if they're not in a high trust culture, it's going to depend a lot on what is the nature of the church that they're in already. Like if the church is like very performance driven, you toe the line or you hit a certain standard of behavior or dress or performance, that's a place where like, all right, you probably don't want to start risking that in your current church. Right. Finding other pastors or finding an Ed Underwood or somebody like that. So,
Sometimes what I'll do,
So,
Josh, is I will tell them, give me one elder in your church that you really good friends, who you trust. Like I was working with a church in Texas, and well, you remember that you were working with me with it, and yeah, and there was this one outstanding elder. When I started talking to him about high trust culture, he was taking notes. He was totally in, man, because he worked in
yeah,
corporate. He was a big corporate dude where you got to have collaboration. He knew that. He knew that the church was jacked up and that they had harmony at work.
yeah,
So what I did was I got this pastor together with this elder, and I said, how can you help him feel safe so
yeah.
that the two of you together could begin to change culture? By the way, just last week, I had my very last meeting with that church,
Yeah.
and it looks like they're going to make it, buddy.
That's awesome, man. That's sweet.
It looks
That's
like they're going to
awesome.
make it. Yeah. Yeah, it really does. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Sweet. That's excellent. Okay, so for the pastors who are listening, and maybe the idea of a high trust culture is like one of the maybe they've not really heard that described before. Can you give them a bit of a lens to like look at the culture that they have now?
Yeah.
Like, what are some red flags or symptoms that have their roots in broken trust or low trust? Things that they wouldn't recognize, but like, okay, this is a symptom of a low trust culture, a dangerous culture. What are some of those red flags that you see?
I think the number one red flag would be that the meeting isn't the meeting.
What does that mean?
It means that the meetings, the elder meetings and the staff meetings are gamed. And you get that? They're gamed. So you'll have 4 elders who want to see this happen, and they know that their other 5 elders aren't going to like it. So you can tell when you get to the meeting that these guys have been talking on the phone. I'll bring up this and you bring up that. Or you had the staff meeting where everybody smiles. Yeah. And then everybody goes to their friend and goes, did you hear what Ed said? I can't believe he said that. Yeah, that'd be one thing. The second indicator would be that you feel like you don't have permission to talk about what's really on your heart. If I brought this up, I'm out of here. That's the sign of a low trust culture. Another sign of a low trust culture is that the ministries aren't collaborating. They're in competition. So the worship ministry is in competition with the children's ministry, especially when it comes to budgetary items. And then a big sign of a low trust culture is it's not designed around the New Testament. The leaders don't view themselves as shepherds. It's corporate. And the leaders view themselves as managers.
Interesting.
That is if you go to an elder meeting and all they're interested in is the budget and the meeting, and they don't want to pray, and they just want to get the meeting over and go home, that's a sign of a low trust culture. I would say one of the most telling indicators of a low trust culture is that you built a culture that tries to handle relational and character problems, which we all have.
Yeah.
And they try to solve them structurally rather than relationally, rather than saying to someone, hey, your sermon last week, you preached angry. And how can we help you? What was going on in your life? I've worked with pastors where there are certain buzzwords they can't use. For instance, a pastor working in a really, really conservative part of America, a real conservative part of America, he was teaching on Jonah and Nahum, and he used the phrase speaking truth to power. That's the message of Jonah and Nahum, you know? And he was told in no uncertain terms, you will never use that term again, because that's what liberals say.
Oh, wow.
Those are the kind of things these I call them kids because they're all in their 40s or 50s. But that's the kind of things that they're dealing with. Those are sure indicators of a low trust culture. And then the other thing is, I say to guys, ask your wife, does she feel safe here?
Wow.
And if your wife doesn't feel safe, man, you got to either risk changes or you're going to be leaving within 18 months. I promise you. Yeah.
Okay. So for the pastors hearing that and they're like checking off, oh yeah, no, we got that. Oh, we got that. So what then? I feel like you say, talk to me, like talk to
Yeah.
Ed Underwood. Like I
Yeah.
know that's your heart. I know you love to have conversations
Yeah, I
with
do. Yeah.
leaders. So I'll make sure there's very plentiful links to contact you.
Yeah. If they'll just
So
contact me, I always call them back. It's not that it
yeah,
isn't that large of a ministry that especially pastors who just want advice and they
yeah,
want to know, if they want to do this. I love
yeah,
talking to those guys, and I'll be real
yeah.
honest with them. And sometimes I'll be real blunt with them, and we'll get to those things in a
Well, I
minute.
was
Yeah.
gonna say, like, so if someone wants to reach out and they're looking for an outside opinion, unbiased,
Mhm.
what are the questions that you're gonna ask them?
Well, first I'm going to ask them about the culture they're in right now. But if they're in a real conservative teaching type culture that where grace is taught, I mean, and you and I both know grace can be taught and not lived, but at least if it's taught,
Yeah,
I feel like I know for sure I can work with those guys. But
yeah,
a man of the text, I believe the Bible, and I
yeah,
think the Bible. So if they're not really into the text and they're not really sure about that, I'm gonna have a hard time working with them because I'm taking them to Bible passages all the
yeah,
time. And then I want to know about a little bit about the history of the church. I'll want to know a little bit about their marriage. And then I will typically ask the question, if I helped you, what would you like your church to look like in 5 years? Just in 5 years?
mm,
What are the ways that you would like to see it change? And sometimes they'll start talking about stuff that I can't help them with. And
yeah,
I will say, there's this group called Unstuck Group. That's what they do.
yeah,
You call those guys.
yeah,
But then I will say, well, I think I can help you with that. And we need to
yeah,
start the conversation. And I have exercises that we go through. I have seminars that we teach. I love getting on a Zoom with them and their elders and talking real
yeah,
honestly. I will advocate for them as
yeah,
long as they'll tell the truth. I'll advocate for them.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I grew up the son of a pastor, the grandson of a pastor. I'm the oldest of 7 sons, and so you can imagine like the things I've been hearing my whole life. And I had a really contentious relationship with church leadership for a long time. I've been a lay pastor now for coming on 6 years. And as you alluded to earlier, pastoring can be very, very lonely because you're always on. Like anytime you're around church people, you're on because they're looking to you as their representative for God. That
Yeah.
means that sometimes you're a lightning rod and like
Yeah.
you're taking a lot of hits that you don't deserve.
Yeah.
And
When
there's,
they're mad at God and they take it out on you out in the foyer.
yeah, yeah, 100%,
Yeah.
100%. And so what I'm hearing you say is that you're not going to charge somebody if they reach out to have a short conversation with you,
No.
just to kind of get an idea about where they're at and where their church is at. I think about how much of my own ministry today was formed unintentionally, I think, but just by working so closely with you and then with your materials.
Yeah.
I think it's like the hours and hours of video editing that we've done, like just like going through your videos and stuff. That has really shaped my ministry as
Yeah.
well. I look at the culture that we have and that's growing at New Life Fellowship, and man, this is an extension of what I learned with Ed. And I think it's just such a special, wonderful thing.
Like I was working with a pastor, and you and I were just talking. He's Canadian. You kind of know the landscape, but he comes from a totally different tradition than you and I do. So one of the things Judy and I do is we have couples come in to our home. Anyway, so they came into our house, and we took them up in the mountains, had a good time with them. But I realized that what he wanted was so far away from what he had.
Yeah.
My first question to him was, are you willing to give this 20 years?
Oof.
Are you willing to give this 20 years? Because
Yeah.
he's talking about huge cultural changes. People who have never understood the grace of God. All they've ever known is performance Christianity, measuring up. A church that has zero structure. I mean, zero. They would just get together and decide things, and they've been doing it for 100 years.
Yeah.
A church that didn't know how to do job descriptions, never done discipleship. Now, a lot of guys, I won't say that. I'll say 5 years. Will you give it 5 years? Because they're in a relatively healthy church. Probably we
Yeah.
just need to get the elders to quit being managers. And we
Yeah.
need to figure out if it's a larger church. Typically what happens when I work with them, We try to start working on the elders, get them to be more shepherds and less managers, and understand the power of that to get them into discipleship. And typically there'll be 2, maybe 3 staff members in these larger churches who just aren't on board. They don't want to do this. They do not want to do the down and dirty high trust culture. They just want to put on their pastor mask and go somewhere where everybody will give them kudos. And so that's fine. They leave. Another question I'll ask is, after I get to know them, sometimes I've had to say to a pastor, I love your wife. She's an awesome woman. I'm not sure she's wired to be a pastor's wife. Because it's harder to be a pastor's wife than it is to be a pastor.
Wow.
But sometimes I just have to tell the guy, I said, I think you might want to try to get a job working in a seminary, and these are talented guys who could. But I think that whole church culture pressure thing, which is never going to change, no matter how healthy your church is, it's never going to change, because you're always going to have entitled people and things like that.
Yeah.
Another thing I would have to say to some pastors is, and I meet with their elders, I listen to their heart, and I will just say, you got to get out of there. It's these guys are powerful men, these elders. They have money. They're not used to being disagreed with. And I mean, if you want to just get up on Sunday morning and preach and make them happy, you're going to have a good living. But my heart tells me you're never going to be set. You want to do real ministry. You want to see lives change. You want to see culture change. And you want to make disciples, and you want to be in a safe place. And I have connections and I can say, I'll help you. Another hard thing I'll say to them is, and I learned this from a seminary professor that I had in pastoral care at Dallas Seminary. And he would say, Ed, be patient. You're 6 months away from getting what you want. Isn't that a great line?
Wow.
You're 6 months away from getting what you want. Just back off. And so sometimes I'll have to tell them that. And I'll have to tell them, sometimes you need to be stealthy. I mean, there are things that you want to say that you shouldn't say yet. So sometimes change comes slowly, and culture changes really, really slowly. Yeah.
Oh, man, we've covered a ton of ground. And I'm not just going to ask you to wrap it all up with this last question, but what are some very practical, actionable, I can take this away and start doing this now, these things that are going to start helping me move the needle towards a high trust culture, towards a vibrant discipleship-first church, knowing that that's a big job, but things I can do today to start moving the needle in that direction?
Discipleship is the easiest. Guys call me and they say, how do I start a disciple-making culture? I say, the main thing is you go first. You find some guy in your church and you start discipling him. And then when you get to your elder meetings, you just say, hey, I'm discipling George. And you wouldn't believe the changes in this guy's life. He's no longer an addict. He's gone to recovery. He's married to, how'd that happen? I'm discipling him. Really? You just start discipling. And then if you find a few disciplers, you start equipping them. And discipleship becomes viral in a church pretty quickly. Because once somebody's experienced it, they'll never go back. The high trust culture, what I do is then I tell them, I say, hey, look, why don't you start by teaching, maybe go through Philippians or go through the upper room, teach on the great commandment. What does loving one another mean? Teach Ephesians 4. And I just have passages that they can start teaching and try to once again develop intrigue. What would it feel like if we were in a church where you knew that what people were saying about you to other people was what people were saying to you? How would you like that? That kind of a thing. And then the other thing is just to risk it and to say, sometimes I got to tell you guys the truth. I can't go on like this. Where there's it's been 3 years of drama. My family's coming apart. I go home angry, and there's just a lot of PTSD in pastors. And I would just tell them, somewhere along the way, you have to get honest. And I was talking to a guy just 2 weeks ago, and he said, we got this problem, we got this problem, we got this problem, we got this problem. He's been there for 4 years. And I said, the first way I can help you is for you to answer this question. He said, yeah, sure, whatever, Ed. And I said, when did you start lying? He said, what do you mean? I said, when did you start lying and giving the impression that you were okay with this stuff that's been going on now for 3 years? He said, man, you got me. And I said, okay.
Ugh.
So let's start. And I can help him with this.
Yeah.
You give me your heart. I'll wordsmith it in ways that I know that might help people. And then you could just take it to your elder meeting and read it. Or you could take it to your executive pastor and read it. So that's the kind of things I would do. Yeah.
Oh, I feel like we could talk for hours more. And if I have my way, we'll have a lot more of these conversations.
I love it.
I love it.
I miss you, Josh. I miss you. Yeah.
Well, I will never get tired of someone telling me that. So yeah. I mean, it's been really special to have this role at the lead pastor. And I get to hear from pastors from all over the world about what they're going through, what they're struggling with. And I look at my own struggles that I've had with church and the pain I've experienced and the ways that God has helped restore that. And I know for sure, like, you've been a big part of that in my own life. And so I'm eager for people to learn more about Ed Underwood and learn more about Recentered Group, because I think there's so many redemptive stories that you have. And I love that line you said about redemptive stories bring hope.
Yeah.
And it's just so good. And so I'm excited for people to hear more of those. And maybe you write a series of articles for lead pastor about redemptive stories. Like, that'd be so cool. So
I just have one redemptive story about Josh. So, I'm teaching Josh a high trust culture, and he's really getting it. He goes, this is great, man. This is great. And so we had some problems at Recentered, and it had to do with an unhealthy employee. I thought, I can make it work. And he just had it all laid out. And he said, Ed, I'm telling you the truth. This is a man you cannot trust. And I have the data. Will you trust me when I tell you that? And I remember thinking, shoot, I shouldn't have taught Josh this stuff.
Well, I got this recorded. I got it recorded.
I know it. But you remember the conversation. And that day I called the chairman of my elder board and I said, hey, look, it's over. We're starting to, with grace, move this guy out. And that was Josh doing the high trust culture to me.
Well, I remember that conversation, and I remember my heart like pounding in my chest.
Yeah, and because I'm paying you.
I know, exactly. And so I think that's the thing for pastors listening too, is that you never know what God's doing in the heart of the other person who you're going to talk to, right? And that's something that in my own devotion and my own like prayer times with Jesus is that he says to me so often, is like, I'm going ahead of you. I'm going before you. And so I'm never stepping into a situation that Jesus isn't already there. He's already prepared it for me. And so that gives me this level of confidence as well. And then the other comment I would make about that is that you and I had spent hours together.
Yeah.
And we had the relational credit with each other where I felt like it's a risk, but I felt like I knew you and I knew your character. And I knew that even if I was out of line, you would be gentle.
Plus you were kind. I remember you kept shaking your head and you said, Ed, I know you don't want to hear this.
Yeah.
But this is not a good thing. Anyway, that was really cool. That was a cool moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a cool moment.
And you're right. When your heart's if you're going to speak the truth in love, you're going to have those times where you just got to say, I am going to have to tell this children's pastor, here's the way it is. We love you. You're so talented. We love the events you put on. But the way you treat people, we got to address that. Yeah. We have to address it. Anyway, yeah.
Oh, it's so good to talk to you, man.
Yeah, good talking to you too, man.
Again.
Yeah.
We are absolutely going to do this again. But again, for folks listening, this is Ed Underwood. Go to recenteredgroup.com. There are contact buttons there. Send Ed a message. Let him know that Josh sent you, and you can absolutely have a conversation. No money needs to change hands. Talk to somebody who understands the unique frustrations and struggles of being a pastor in a difficult culture. Like, Ed understands it. I promise
Oh
you, it
man,
is
yeah.
not something that you will regret doing. So, dude, would
All
you
right.
mind just brief prayer before the listeners before we go?
Yeah, no problem at all. First thing I would say is, I love you, Josh. I just love you.
Thanks, bro.
Yeah. Well, Lord, our hearts are with pastors. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the name of what Josh did, lead pastor. And he knows from being a pastor's kid how how difficult it can be for pastors. And I want to pray for those wounded pastors, for those ones that are about ready to give up, for those ones who are saying, I don't know if I could take it anymore. I pray, first of all, if I've said something that would screw them up, Holy Spirit, cause them to forget it. But if Josh and I in this conversation have said something that gives them hope, I pray that they would contact me, contact lead pastor. I just pray that they would know Jesus is pleased with their life and he is
Mhm.
going before them, but he's not asking them to destroy their family, to destroy their marriage, and destroy their emotional life for the sake of the gospel. There's a better way. And I pray that you would help them believe that, please. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good words, man.
All right, buddy.
Thank you so much, man.
You bet, Josh. This has been good.